Hi, I'm A.Lopez. I served as Chief of Staff at the Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection for 3 years. During that time, I learned valuable lessons in leadership and decision-making. Today, I'm going to share with you 6 principles that I learned during my time so that it can help you in business, in life, and in any challenge that you might be facing. Starting with Principle 1, clarity in chaos. I remember there was a time in May of 2010, we were alerted a bomber was attempting to blow up a car in Times Square. Turned out that Faisal Shahzad had tried and fled the scene. We had information coming in at headquarters in Washington, D.C. that he had boarded an Emirates plane headed to Dubai. Yet the FBI was telling us that they had his home surrounded in Connecticut and that they were sure that he was there. So we had to make a decision. Do we act, board the plane and see if he's there? Or do we wait for the FBI to raid his home? And as our officers were telling us, he wasn't in Connecticut. He was on the plane headed overseas. So we made a decision. We boarded the plane, and sure enough, there he was in his seat, took him off, and he was arrested. The principle and the lesson is this. Sometimes you have to act with the information that you have, or wait, be paralyzed, and let bad guys get away. It doesn't have to be just in these types of circumstances. It can be in business, it can be in life. If you let the lack of information freeze you, paralyze you, then nothing will get done. Or you just have to be comfortable with the fact that sometimes you're not going to have complete information and you might have to adjust as new facts and information comes forward. And if you want to get ahead, that's exactly what you have to do. You have to learn to be comfortable with the fact that many times a decision must be made to keep moving forward. Principle 2, protect the front line first. Customs and Border Protection is a massive agency with over 60,000 men and women deployed across the world. Many times, I felt that we had an obligation to get out to the field and see what our agents and officers were seeing. I remember the times that we would travel to Sells, Arizona, to the forward operating base near the San Miguel gate. We slept with the agents, we dined with the agents, we went out to do exercises and see exactly what it was that they were doing, whether it was on ATVs, on horseback, or on one of the helicopters. That was important for us to learn on the ground what it was that they were facing. But it was also important for them to understand that we cared, that we were listening. Then there was a time that I traveled with the Secretary of Homeland Security over the New Year holiday. We went to Afghanistan right after a bomb was detonated, and we lost some of our agents. We visited the border with Pakistan, had the opportunity to dine with them, and of course, spend time while they were away with their families during the holiday. Then I remember the times in 2009 and 2010 that we attended several funerals of agents that we lost in the line of duty. It was important for their families to know that we supported them. So that's the principle. You have to protect your front line first. You have to be willing to listen and to put yourself in their shoes. That's what leadership is all about. Getting out of the office, visiting with people who are there to support you, because that's how they make your mission their mission. Principle 3, trust but verify. DHS sometimes is called to work with foreign partners, and one of the questions that we're always asked is, how do you trust them? And the reality is, to some degree, you have to trust them, but you have to be careful with that information. And that was the case when we were working with the Mexican government. We never knew where that information was going to lead. We had vetted units. We did everything that we possibly could to protect the information, yet you never knew. You had to trust. Because if you didn't trust, you couldn't do anything. You would be paralyzed from any mission to take down the cartels. I remember one such mission. We flew the UAV out of Sierra Vista. It was on location. The team went in to arrest the suspect, and yet later we found out, after the agents were already in, coffee was still hot on the table where the suspect was sitting, but he was gone. Minutes before, later, we found out he was tipped off that the raid was about to take place. And that's just the sacrifice and the issues that you face with. Sometimes you're gonna get it right. Sometimes the information is gonna leak. So you just have to be careful with how much you're willing to share. So that's the principle here. Either you act and you trust a little bit, or you trust a lot, or you don't act. In matters of national security, we were forced to always find a way to act because we wanted to take down the bad guys. But in business and in life, it's the same principle. Either you act and you trust a little, or you're paralyzed and you don't get anything done. We always opted for the opportunity to act and work together collaboratively instead of doing nothing and letting the bad guys get away. Principle 4, Resilience is national security. I remember in 2009, we had a different type of situation. It was a national pandemic, H1N1, the swine flu. And as we got into it more deeply, we had different information from different health experts, and yet we needed to act. Some told us that we needed temperature checks at the airport. Others gave us different advice. And yet, we couldn't shut down international travel. People still needed to be able to move, to get on airplanes, to arrive, to land. Trade needed to interact at our borders. And as we got further into the pandemic, new information was developing. So that's the principle here. You can't wait and act when you have 100% information. You have to go and make decisions as you progress. That's what resilience is all about, not being rigid. And that's what leadership is. If you're rigid, you fail. If you're flexible and you're able to adjust as information comes, you succeed. But you have to always understand that there will always be a certain degree of bad information, and you can't be paralyzed by that. Leadership is about acting, moving forward, not about being frozen. So resilience is just that, is understanding that you're never gonna have 100% complete information. You're going to have to act or you're gonna be paralyzed. Principle 5, leadership is service, not status. As you can imagine, Washington, D.C. is filled with people with fancy titles, fancy jobs, and sometimes they love to brag about what they do and what the title is. But leadership is really about understanding what role you play in any given situation. Sometimes you're called to act and be in front, and sometimes you're asked to play a supporting role. I remember times that we would travel and we would make sure that the commissioner, the secretary, or the president was fully briefed and they had all the information that they needed to succeed in whatever environment they were going into. I remember traveling with President Obama to Guadalajara, Mexico, and I was in charge of making sure that the briefing material about all the activities that Customs and Border Protection was in charge of were in his package of information so that he could read it and study it and be prepared when he met with the Mexican president. And other times, I remember being the one having to go and provide a briefing to a member of Congress or go to the White House and talking about what it was that we were doing. That's what leadership is, understanding where you are and how you fit in, and knowing that not all the time are you called to be in the middle of the spotlight. Sometimes providing that support is leadership in and of itself. So here's the principle. When you're called to act, titles don't matter. Leadership is about understanding how you fit in to make the entire team succeed. Whether in business, in life, or in politics, always knowing where you fall in and how you support the team for success is critically important. Principle 6. Decisions don't wait for perfect information. I remember being 22 years old, mayor of the city of Nogales. A few months into my term, we got the incredibly bad news of the September 11th plane hijackings in New York, in Pennsylvania, and in Washington, D.C. The federal government immediately shut down the border. For a community like Nogales, it's especially hard because we depend so much on our trade. But as a young mayor, the community looked at me to make a decision and help them understand what was going on in the middle of all that chaos. So I had two objectives. One, provide the emotional support for our community to come together, to heal, to understand what was going on. So we quickly organized some events around City Hall, a vigil, so that people could come together and mourn and heal and understand that together we were united. And then the second objective was working with the state of Arizona and the federal government to open up our borders so that trade could flow. People were trapped on either side of the border. They wanted to get home. It wasn't sustainable to have the border closed. Working with Governor Jane D. Hall, a Republican in Arizona, we quickly came together to deploy the National Guard so they could provide security. So that was the principle here. Sometimes your job as a leader is to provide clarity in the middle of the chaos. We did that in Nogales, and that lesson has been with me for all of this time, even in my time as Chief of Staff at Customs and Border Protection. Leaders in business, leaders in government, and even in life, your job is to provide clarity in the middle of all that chaos. So there you have it, the 6 lessons I learned as Chief of Staff at the Department of Homeland Security. These lessons were forged during many years of leadership at the Department of Homeland Security. What's most important is that you take each one of these lessons and apply them to your life. Whatever the lesson is that fits your situation the most. Remember, as leaders, our obligation is to always move forward. So I encourage you to do just that. Don't be paralyzed, move forward.